welcome back to Party Trip Astrology. I'm Nina.
I'm Shaina.
And this is Lilith in the 6th house. Yes, it's very predictable at this point. If you don't know, we're going through the Lilith signs, and then we're going through the Lilith houses. We go sign house, sign house, sign house. You can watch that if you've got an hour and a half, because we ramble on things.
I know.
But it's because they're full of information.
Believe it or not, I always cut out more than half of the footage.
There you go.
What's so funny is that you mentioned we're pretty predictable, and I feel like we always get comments of like, who are you doing next? Or do this next, or do this next. We're going in order, guys. We're going in order. We never address the comments.
I bite my tongue anytime I see a comment that says, when will you do like Lilith and Sagittarius? I just want to be like, after Lilith and Scorpio.
We are no longer selling joint Party Astrology readings, but our separate information, if you would like to get a reading from either of us, will be listed in the down bar, so there's always that option. So if you go to astro-freak.com/shop, that's where all my readings are.
And my readings are at ninabastrology.com.
We always compare and contrast between Lilith in the sign and Lilith in the house, and with Virgo Lilith, we mentioned that they have a lot of problems with being very clean, being hyper clean, hyper organized, and that can really bog them down. But I found, and this isn't always true, maybe they have a Lilith in Virgo in the 6th house or something like that, but most of the time, Lilith in the 6th house usually are the opposite. They usually quite literally rebel against the typical way of doing things, daily organization, cleaning up, doing to-do lists, keeping a calendar, all that little stuff. Normally they're rebelling against all that stuff, and I find that these people, more often than not, have a lot of troubles managing their daily life and keeping in order and keeping on track, because Lilith just adds so much volatile energy that it's hard to stay focused, it's hard to stay on the straight and narrow, I guess.
Yeah, really, the difference between interpreting Lilith in a sign and Lilith in a house, even if it's the house that sign rules, the differences are, the personality that Lilith is stepping into, which is the case for Lilith in a sign. So Lilith in Virgo, like we talked, will have this kind of obsessive nature with the way that they want to be cleaned and organized and in control, whatever. And Lilith in a house will show you where that Lilith, whatever character it's taking on, kind of shows up in your life, what area in your life Lilith shows up in. So when it shows up in the 6th house of everyday activities, it's not a big indicator of your personality. It's not an angular house. It's not something that you necessarily maybe identify with to the point that other people recognize you for it, but it is still something that shows up in your everyday little life. And I think that because Lilith is so obsessive, and the 6th house is what we do constantly, what we do consistently, I think that Lilith in the 6th house just makes you more prone to obsessive behavior or compulsive behavior. I'm not a mental health professional, okay? I'm not here to diagnose you from an armchair. I don't even know you, but the 6th house is compulsive and Lilith is obsessive. And obsessive compulsive disorder isn't all about cleanliness. So it's like we don't need to attach that label to Lilith in the 6th house. But other sort of obsessive compulsive tendencies can definitely be associated with Lilith in the 6th house, where you almost attach to something and you can't let it go. So, not a diagnosis, I don't even know you. I am a Cancer rising, so I love pregnancy content. That's a little guilty pleasure fun fact about me. There's this woman I followed since I was actually 13, and she's pregnant now, and she's talking about how she is fixated on how she should sleep on her left side while pregnant. That's a little blurb, a little fun fact that she's just sort of attached to. And I think that can happen a lot in many different instances for people who might have a Lilith in the 6th house. It's the little things, right? The 6th house is all about the little things, little everyday things. And there's just this sort of like attachment and obsessiveness that you can attach to everyday little things.
And you can even like get so distracted by those little things that you're attached to that kind of forget about the grander scheme of things. Like even something like, oh, I haven't done work in days because I've been attached to my obsessive things that I've been doing and focusing on. It's just kind of like weird time management, I always find, kind of comes from this energy because of those tendencies that'll get your mind focused on something else, the distraction kind of thing, you know?
Absolutely. Lilith does not lend itself to healthy habits like sleeping and I don't know what else, and eating 3 meals a day,
keeping a calendar,
and that sort of stuff.
I've known people with this energy that have a lot of illnesses, and I think that can also be a common thing with Lilith in the 6th house. A lot of physical health illnesses too that you need to like diabetes, that you need to constantly keep track of, and I think that a lot of times it can be really hard for the Lilith in the 6th house person to keep that all straight, or because there's just so many things you have to always keep straight. How the fuck can you really keep all that stuff straight, especially if it's changing all the time, because health is changing and it's a mutable house and all that stuff, and Lilith is chaotic, so it's like, how do I keep track of all this health stuff that's always changing in my life? Oh my god, you know.
Yeah, and the whole point of Lilith is that you embody Lilith in this area of your life, in this specific sign, specific character, and you embody that to your own detriment. Like, well, I've said it once, we'll say it a billion more times, surely. It's the itch that you need to scratch. It feels good, but it's dangerous and bad for you and leaves scars and unpleasantness. And I think that with Lilith in the 6th house, that obsessiveness just takes place in like the most random little things. It's even like a little less interesting. That's why I'm saying that like Lilith in the 6th house, you don't necessarily identify as like a Lilith type of person. It's even more unique from person to person because everyone's like 6th house experience is quite different. Well, everyone does something different for work. Everyone's, you know, version of being healthy in their body is different. Everyone kind of goes about a different routine. The 6th house is ruled by Virgo, a Mercury ruled sign. So the 6th house is actually, I wouldn't call it necessarily health, I would call it hygiene. Like mental hygiene and, you know, physical hygiene. These are all things that you get to health. And because, you know, Lilith is disrupting your 6th house, the 6th house is one of those houses, it's the house that you don't even want anything in. Like everything is disruptive to the 6th house, and Lilith even more so. So you'll find that people with Lilith in the 6th house, unfortunately, their Lilith takes a greater toll on their mental health, on their emotional health, physical health, all of these things, because that's the area of their life that their obsessive tendency is kind of coming through as. It's a bit more adaptive from person to person, where it's your own little flavor of how you want to destroy your mental health, and it's probably something so simple. It's probably something so simple that you've just like dug yourself into. Paranoias, fears, health anxiety, that stuff.
So I tried to kind of put on a shirt-ish for all of these videos. This one, I was like, maybe. It says New World Distorter, and it's like a person that's confused because they're like, how do I do this world? And I feel like you guys are confused. Like, how do I do this world? How do I clean my room? Like, why do I have so many mental health problems that take so much time? Why do we do this?
You're wearing a lock, and I remember in the Lilith and Virgo video, you had like these lock earrings, and you were like, oh, I just threw these on. But I was like, it's like they're trapped by their own, I don't know. I feel like if you're confronting your Lilith every single day and like every little thing in life, it feels like you're trapped by it. It feels like
that's another thing that
you're bound by it.
Absolutely, that sucks about Lilith in the 6th house is like you're coming in touch with your Lilith every goddamn day, every second of every day. You don't get a break from it. But Lilith with the 6th house, it's like always your problem. You know, it's not anybody else's problem. It's your Lilith problem that you constantly have to deal with, that you constantly have to maintain. Okay, so I think that also with health stuff, Lilith in the 6th house can go one of two ways. I've known people with this placement that it's like they have been taken to the doctor like every day since they were a kid. Like they spend time in and out of the hospital and in and out of different doctor visits and like all that stuff, and it's just like all consuming. Or I know people where it's the complete opposite way and they haven't been to the dentist since they were 5. They threw a fit and they refuse to go do, even get a haircut. They don't even want to do that. So I find that it's either like a hyper neglect or like a hyper, almost like obsessive thing, or a need, you need to always go.
I also think that Lilith is one of those things, like I keep mentioning, it's not the primary thing that like sticks out in a chart. You're not necessarily acting out of your Lilith at all times. It's something that you can indulge in, but once you indulge in, there's like, it's the rabbit hole. There's no really getting yourself out of it. So I sometimes wonder if the association with Lilith in the 6th house, people neglecting their health, if that's just like knowing that paying any mind to that area of their life that Lilith is in is just going to throw them down the rabbit hole. And that's their own like mechanism for survival, is just like not indulging in that at all. And sometimes you have both. Like I mentioned, health anxiety with this placement. Definitely a possibility. It's that obsessiveness in your house of health and hygiene and whatnot. And Lilith is nonsensical. Does not make any sense. You can be like terrified that you have lupus. Like you're convinced that you have this autoimmune disorder and you have lupus, but never put on sunscreen. And like, that's something that you have to do when you have lupus. But you're like consumed with the fear of it and it's like plaguing you, but there's no sense in like, okay, so if this is worrying you, do something about it. Or even like, if you have health anxiety, if you think you have a cold, run down to the Minute Clinic. But Lilith is so nonsensical and almost enjoys the torture that she puts you through that she's like, no, just worry about it. Don't do anything about it. Another thing that we touched on with Lilith and Virgo is that because Lilith is nonsensical, if she's in a position that has to do with your health, she might be affecting your health in a totally nonsensical way. It can be one of those things where you're fainting, having dizzy spells, you are nauseous all the time, whatever, you're dealing with some sort of sickness, and it just comes up like a big question mark. Because like with Virgo being a Mercury ruled sign, it can just have to do with like stress, with like mental anxiety and stress manifesting itself in a physical way. And so it's just like a big question mark, and Lilith in the 6th house will just do this thing where it's like, I'm just gonna fuck up this area in your life that makes absolutely no sense. That's even why I think that you brought up this like reputation that some of them have for neglecting themselves totally. It's because that area of their life doesn't make any sense.
What it could also be is there's no treatment for this. There's no cure for this. You'd like something like chronic pain, I think would be common with Lilith in the 6th house. Also, what could be a thing with Lilith in the 6th house as to why you don't go to the doctor, why you don't treat these things, is because Lilith is the place you were exiled from. So maybe you didn't have the resources to go to the doctor. You didn't, your family didn't have insurance, or, they didn't care for you like that because you live in the 6th house. Maybe they didn't do daily things for you like that. Maybe this can even be a situation where you were never taught how, like, oh, this is how you have a bank account. This is what loans mean. This is how you write a check. You were never taught those things. You're never told how to do those things. You can have a big fear of doing those things, and you can really want to avoid it and really try to run away from it because there's a paranoia aspect to Lilith. The older I get, the more I realize like doing taxes can be a very paranoia inducing thing because you're afraid you're going to do it wrong. And with somebody with a Lilith in the 6th house that wasn't given those tools, that was kind of felt exiled against understanding that stuff or being able to do that stuff, they can have even more paranoia because Lilith is nonsensical. Lilith is can be very fear-based a lot of times. Even possibly maybe this is a placement common to have dyslexia or something like that, where it even can make it like hard to read like what you're writing or like what you're filling out maybe.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is that with the part of Lilith that has to do with exile comes the part of Lilith that wants to master what they've been exiled from. So I think that what you brought up with paranoia is like so spot on, because it's sort of like this same train of like, I wasn't taught how to bag my groceries. Like, I don't know to put the eggs on the top, something like that. A lot of 12th house people, they'll be like, oh, there's a way to bag groceries? Oh, there's a way to put on a sweater? Like, we had a teacher who was a 12th house stellium, and she just like put her clothes on wrong. It was...
But this woman was like 50, 60 years old, and she'd gone her whole life, and she's like, is my sweater on backwards? It wasn't just on backwards, it was like twisted.
Yes! It was full on twisted.
Lilith in Virgo doesn't have those tools and then tries to master those tools like to an extreme point, because the 6th house is just like, it's Virgo. It's all like, this is what's right. This is how you do this. It's Mercury. It's like ba 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 da 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 da. What you're striving to do is to get that, is to do everything right. I think that we even talked a lot about this with Lilith in Virgo, is this rigidity of thinking there is a right and there is a wrong, and having a hard time kind of juggling or swallowing the idea of, you know, the opposite 12th house Pisces energy, where it's like everything is universal and nothing can be boxed in and all of that kind of stuff. So you're trying to live up to those judgments, behave inside of those lines, but it becomes so much harder and anxiety inducing when you're trying to figure that out yourself. And, you know, in my humble Pisces South Node opinion, it's hard to be able to do what is right and not what is wrong always, because the world is so subjective and you're inevitably going to be paralyzed and stuck in this inertia if you are constantly trying to only do what is objectively right, because it's hard to say what's objectively right in the grand scheme of things. But I guess that's like a bit more of a philosophical take. When it comes to taxes, as much as my Neptune conjunct Mercury would not like to believe it, there is a right way to do it and many wrong ways to do it.
Okay, so we haven't really brought up the fact that the 6th house also rules like daily work, your daily work environment. And so with Lilith in there, these people can get into jobs, but when there's like upper management, like already established, you know, a 6th house, you're kind of a cognitive machine kind of job. And they'll get into the job and they're really good at playing both sides, like playing the managerial side and being professional, playing the coworker side and being relatable, and then playing the personable side of the customer. I think these people can make kind of fun bosses, because Lilith is where you rebel, and so if you rebel in the 6th house, that means that you're gonna, if you're a boss and you have some kind of power, you're gonna have more fun in the workplace. You're gonna kind of bend the rules a little bit. You're gonna be a little bit more rebellious, and sometimes even bending the rules a little bit can just be nicer on the employees. Like, oh great, I don't have to follow this stupid rule that doesn't make much sense to me. The Lilith in the 6th house will be like, yeah, I totally fucking hate stupid rules that don't make any sense, so let's not do it. And you're all, everyone's like, yeah, you know, and they're able to play and have fun. You know, they also can manipulate people in the workplace to get where they want to go and be on people's good sides and all that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't say this is like a detrimental position, in the sense that like if you work with somebody with Lilith in the 6th house, you're not going to be like, wow, they pulled one over on me or something like that. You know, they just know how to get where they want in the rankings and move up and that kind of stuff. Now sometimes because it is Lilith, that can backfire and they can have a kind of embarrassing ending or something like that, but that's not always the case, but it can sometimes happen. And also with Lilith, it also is a little bit of a darker, more sexual energy, as we've mentioned, so there can be some sexual romances, or I wouldn't say romances, there can be some sexual flings in the workplace because of this. You might be very attracted to your coworkers. You might find that that's for whatever reason. Maybe when you're in uniform, you're the most attractive, you know? People are attracted to the uniform you wear, something like that. You know, because Lilith is a harsher energy. It can go the other way if you might experience some sexual harassment in the workplace. That can be a common thing because people see that Lilith in the 6th house and they're like, ooh, what's that? And they feel like, people always think they can cross Lilith's boundaries, and since yours is in the 6th house, people might try to cross your boundaries at work like that, unfortunately.
With Lilith in the 6th house, the whole point of it is that the area in which your Lilith is showing up in is in your workplace. That's one of the areas. So you can get obsessive in your work environment, maybe with the way that you do your work, but a Lilith in the 6th house, I also think, can definitely get obsessed with the day-to-day, everyday, or one simple facet of their life. Like, think of a Dwight Schrute, right? From The Office, just like honing in on just like must do everything perfect and getting obsessive over that. But also that trope of like the sexual nefarious type of you coming out in work. And the obsessive nature of Lilith coming out in your workplace can mean that you can get obsessively sexual over your coworkers, and maybe even, I don't know, I think to an extent, flirting is manipulation. It's to an extent. So you can be very flirty in the workplace because it's sort of manipulating. You're manipulating the people around you to like you, and it's a sexually motivated act. And Lilith is quite a sexual being. So Shaina really caught herself in saying like, it's not workplace romances, it is workplace sexual activity. And there can just be like this obsessiveness of like, I must get this person in my workplace to be seduced by me. And it's also sort of like a power thing. I mean, it might not necessarily be a power thing. You feel a bit more like powerful, like your ego can be boosted a little bit when other people are attracted to you, and especially when you feel like, I really did something sneaky and sly and commendable to get this person attracted to me, and I should pat myself on the back for it. That really boosts your ego, right? It can go that way, or it can go the Dwight Schrute way of like, everything must be done perfectly.
There can be a weird power dynamic thing with Lilith in the 6th house, like either you're hyper subordinate or hyper dominant, or you switch between the two, but it's always like one extreme or the other. I mean, because Lilith is dominance, but the 6th house is subservience, so you kind of have a little bit of both, and I think that a lot of people with Lilith in the 6th house like to play with those extremes. Like the ultimate domination thing, I think, goes into the first two celebrities that I want to mention, which it's fun saying celebrities and I'm saying the two presidents, but I guess they're celebrities. But Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have Lilith in the 6th house. In fact, Barack Obama has Leo Lilith in the 6th house. He's the ruler, he's on top, he makes the decisions, he's the face behind it.
That's so interesting too, because like Lilith never wants to be a subordinate. Yeah. Lilith always wants to be powerful. Mm-hmm. And so it just so happens that when she's in the 6th house, she really rebels against being a subordinate in work. I say she because Lilith is a she, I don't know. And the 2008 primaries, when Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were running against each other, is like a generation shaping event. And it's because we saw representation that we didn't usually see in a presidential race. We saw a woman and we saw a biracial man, a dark-skinned man. And that is just like the essence of, I'm not going to be a subordinate in this position. I'm going to reach for the top chair. I'm going to like be in the Oval Office. So that's so interesting.
You can't exile me, bitch. I think that's such a good point.
Yeah.
Tyra Banks is a Lilith in the 6th house, and if you watch America's Next Top Model, and this might be a smaller thing, but you'll hear like, she catalogs her stuff so well. She has like, because they put photos up of her all the time, videos of like, where do you think, like, if she's not getting it, she's having somebody else do it. But even when she was younger, she's talked about how well she's cataloged her life. She has such an insane memory for every shoot she's ever done, everything she's ever done, every way that she's impacted things. Like, and it's just so fascinating. I feel like that is possibly a Lilith in the 6th house thing. There's this obsessive record keeping.
Yeah, a big part of Tyra Banks' career as well was her body change. Like, she went through a pretty drastic puberty in the middle of her modeling career, where she went from skinny Paris Fashion Week runway model to Sports Illustrated, Victoria's Secret, that whole thing. So she was even like exiled from one area of her career and had to move into another area of her career. She had to like reinvent her work sphere, and also she also made the career shift from model to presenter. And just like in the fashion industry or photography industry, anything that a model would be involved in, and especially the way that it was portrayed in America's Next Top Model by Tyra Banks, and honestly I think she did a lot to perpetuate and promote this culture, it's promoted that the model just has to grin and bear it. And she's sort of just like this clothing rack to be thrown around. And you're like the last priority as a model. I think it's really interesting that Tyra Banks has perpetuated this so heavily because of her Lilith in the 6th house, where she goes from being that in the modeling industry. And certainly that's been her experience because she perpetuates that narrative so hard. And then goes into this position of power as a presenter, as someone who gets to shake her finger or wag her finger and shame and judge other women in the position that she was once in.
Yeah, it totally is that manipulation, power, turnaround thing. Like, also that play with, like, first she was very subordinate when she was in the model role, and now she's super dominant when she's in the presenter role. Somebody who I think perpetuates more of the side of just being a pain in the ass to work with, a known pain in the ass to work with, is Marlon Brando. I've never liked Marlon Brando. I don't know why, but the more I find out about him, the less I like him still. Like, my roommate's obsessed with Apocalypse Now, so I know every goddamn thing about that movie. But he was the worst person to work with. He was asked to just show up to set having read the script, right? He didn't do that. He didn't read the script. He was told to have just come as the weight that he is, but instead he gained he gained so much weight because this Lilith in the 6th house just indulged in not taking care of himself at all. He was just also terrible to work with. He's very controlling in the workplace. He will only do things how he will do them, and even when he does them, it's very half-assed, very half-heartedly. Now, I'm sure that was different in the beginning of his career. But then again, that's that switch around is like maybe he felt like, okay, I'm a subordinate. I don't have my name. I'm really happy to be here, so I'm gonna do it. But now, you know what? I'm on top. So I'm going to exploit that and dominate that. He also is a double Aries. So keep that in mind that this is not going to be the case with everybody that you work with Lilith in the 6th house. And I'm pretty sure he also has sexually harassed people on set and in the workplace, if I'm not mistaken.
In all of the movies that I've seen Marlon Brando in, he's always doing something that I'm like, at the very least, that's questionable sexually. Like, Streetcar Named Desire, that's more than questionable. But Last Tango in Paris, it starts off like very bizarre. If you know the movie, I'm like, that is questionable, the sexual act that he just gets into.
No, and I mean, even in his role in Apocalypse Now, he is like the ultimate manipulator, the ultimate, like, everybody's my servant, I'm turning all of these people into my servants, and I am dominant one, and I control you. Like, he always is playing the hyper-masculine, hyper-dominant roles, which in an interesting way I feel like is that Aries paired with that Lilith in the 6th house. I included Betty White because, like, that girl will never die. Like, she is alive and still working and still going. So, as much as we said, like, Lilith in the 6th house can have really bad health, I wonder if, like, maybe it almost gave her this weird protective thing. I don't know. I just wonder about that.
Do you know how old Betty White is?
I have zero idea.
She's 99.
Whoo! Okay! I did not know that! Obviously, the 6th house has a lot to do with health, and we were talking about, but on an interesting end of the spectrum, Snoop Dogg has Lilith in the 6th house, and I think that shows up in 2 different ways. First of all, he's always working. He's always in everything. His face pops up in all these ads. He's always, you know, on this show and on that show. Like, he never stops working. He never stops putting himself out there. Even if he's not making music, he's doing something. But then also, he smokes weed every day. Lilith is taboo, and smoking weed, especially smoking weed every day, being so hyper associated with weed. I remember hearing a story like he went to a movie theater and, you know, he didn't give a shit. He's gonna light up a joint wherever the fuck he's at. He's gonna smoke wherever the fuck he's at. He has Lilith in the 6th house. He's like, yeah, my right to smoke here is over anybody else's wants. Who cares that it's inside it? I'm allowed to do this because I'm me. But also I think it's interesting, just the habitual part of it, the habitual side of Lilith in the 6th house of like, I need to do this all the time. I need to do this every day. I'm sure part of it's just like that repetitive mechanism, you know, that you get in the habit of. So we have Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lilith in the 6th house. He was kind of my example of being super fit, physically fit, being obsessed with health and fitness and being strong and being that kind of person. That's a common route that it can also take with Virgo Lilith. 6th house Lilith can also take that route as well. Stephen King has a Lilith in the 6th house in Capricorn, and he writes so many books. He just shits that shit out, right? You know, and it's horror books, you know, they're scary, they're Lilith, they're taboo, and he's just like, yeah, book. Let's just keep writing. It's in Capricorn. So we're gonna keep going, we're gonna keep going. Probably has like an obsessive compulsive thing with just keeping on, you know, with writing. I don't know. And all because all of his books are like thick as shit, right? Am I thinking?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know if I'm like making an assumption or if I've heard this before, I'm pretty sure he had to be on coke, or he has to be constantly on coke.
Yeah, right? That's a lot of writing.
Like,
and that only like kind of writing that grind like wires around like that, you know? Yeah, it can just go with drug addictions because it's that habitual thing that you repeat. You know, you can have a little bit of addictive personality depending on the sign that it's in, of course. So yeah, those are some celebrities just to go over so you get a better idea. With Lilith in the 6th house, as we kind of mentioned with Lilith and Virgo, there can be a real want, or probably more with Lilith in the 6th house, like an obligation for feeling like you want to help people. Like you have a real want to help people, but whenever you do, you might kind of feel this Lilith tinge of like a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of resentment because you help somebody. I've noticed that kind of whenever if people with Lilith in the 6th house help me, they'll do the work really well because it's in the 6th house. They'll do it very diligently, but while they're doing it, they might be the kind of most disgruntled people, and then after they're fine probably, but during it's just like they can be in such bad moods. They can just feel this weird, like that Lilith is nonsensical. So it's like even if they really do want to help someone and they really don't give a shit, it can just tinge in. It just look at you a little bit. I'm like, you know.
Yeah, that's probably just like coming from the dislike of being a subordinate. Exactly. And that's like an everyday kind of example, just like doing a favor. Mm-hmm. I'm a subordinate in this situation.
Yeah.
Don't like that. Also, Tyra Banks supposedly was just like an awfully selfish person on America's Next Top Model.
I'm
She's
sure.
Like a horrible boss.
She's got a Sagittarius sun in the 5th house.
No, she's crazy. She has an MLM.
Oh my god, really? Yeah. That feels like a Lilith in the 6th house thing, like a pyramid scheme or whatever.
Oh god.
Going off of the fact of, not wanting to be a subordinate and not wanting to do things for the people, you can really want somebody to take care of you. Or even, like, now that I'm thinking about it, the people that I know with this placement have can have overwhelming mothers too, you know, that like overly nurture, overly take care of you. In some Lilith in the 6th house cases, because again, Lilith can also go exile, maybe you weren't taken care of at all. And in some cases, maybe you weren't. But in other cases, you were overly taken care of. Or if you, either way though, you're really seeking for somebody to take care of you, for somebody to coddle you, for somebody to do those subordinate tasks that you don't want to do for yourself, you know?
Yeah, and I think that a really interesting way that this can manifest is in being a hypochondriac. If you're a hypochondriac,
either to the point where you're like constantly making people go down this worry train of like, maybe I have this, maybe I don't, or you go so far as to make yourself sick with all of the worry. I'm thinking of like The Secret Garden, the kid in that. That's a way that you manipulate people into taking care of you, which Lilith loves a nice little clever moment of like, I got you to do that. Same thing, it's like the same thing with like flirting in the workplace.
Also because Lilith deals with, again, daily activities. A daily activity that we do is eating. So these people can have weird relationships with eating. Even just like clear, visceral responses to food. Like, oh, I love this. This is the best thing I've ever eaten. I'm going to eat this every day and over again. And I don't mind eating the same thing every day. Or like, nope, for some reason I absolutely don't like that. I will never eat it. I don't even want to taste that. Like, or even weird things where it's like, oh, this has been in the fridge for too long. It's a leftover. Or, oh, I don't like this texture. Oh, I don't like this smell. Oh, I don't like this thing. Like real visceral responses to that kind of stuff. Like this can create a very picky eater or a very specific eater. Like especially if it's like, I know like somebody with like Lilith and Taurus in the 6th house, and you know, they eat the same foods that they ate when they were little and that's all they want to eat, you know? That could be a common thing.
Yeah, also an obsessive relationship with food. I think that food is the absolute success thing. It is something that you do every day that has to do with your health. So there you go. That's the 6th house for you. You can have really obsessive relationships with food, which is probably like more than just an eating disorder. I think that oftentimes we simplify things too much. It's just like, that's an eating disorder. And maybe like, not to get like too Aquarius PC new consciousness over here, but maybe we should relabel it to body dysmorphic disorder, because oftentimes a lot of people with eating disorders become obsessive in other areas of their lives with exercise. It can go into much more than just eating.
And this is a weird thing to say last, but I kind of wanted to leave it till the end because it is kind of a little bit extreme and harsh, and I don't want to like freak anyone out. But I feel like we always have one of those moments in these Lilith videos. I read this somewhere. This wasn't something I came up with, and it had mentioned that like Lilith in the 6th house people are some of the most likely people to commit suicide when they're young, or just have suicidal thoughts when they're young. And I thought about the people that I knew, and I was like, that's pretty true. And I'm still trying to dissect where that comes from. I don't know if it's just because you're approaching Lilith every day, so it's like you're aware of the darkness every day. It's like something that's unavoidable. It's always in your head. And because we mentioned like mental health struggles, maybe that's just a common thing. Or like even like maybe it's the thing of like every day feels so grueling. Every day feels very extreme. There's a lot of weight on every day because Lilith carries a lot of weight to it, that it's exhausting very quickly. I wonder.
To really dissect why there might be that correlation, you have to think that like suicide is the product of a mental health issue. And when Lilith is in the 6th house, that can be a big indicator for mental health issues. It can be a big indicator of not having a very restful mind. And it's disruptive from you being able to do the things that you have to do if you have a mental illness in order to survive, which is self-care, self-study, self-nurture, self-acceptance. I think that it's not a death sentence,
No.
Lilith in the 6th house, by any means. But it is definitely an indication that you will want to check some of your unhealthy habits, some of your unhealthy thought processes. Seek some help if you need to.
I also wonder if it comes from a place of like, again, that subordinance, of feeling subordinate to everybody's wants and wills with what you do every day, and feeling like whether you're alive or not is like one of the only things you can control. I agree it comes from like mental health and stuff, but that might be like a part of it, you know, of like that control thing, trying to grip onto that, I wonder.
Or feeling like you are so small in the grand scheme of the world.
Exactly.
Okay, how do we shift gears?
Yeah.
So Tyra Banks has an MLM.
Yeah, sorry that was the weirdest place to end it on, but that's all we got for you, Lilith in the 6th house people. We have Lilith through Aries and Virgo up, and now Lilith through the 1st and 6th house. So check it out if you haven't.
Which means that we are at the halfway point of the series. Look at that.
Thank you guys so much for being patient while these videos come out. Thank you guys for your support and your comments and everything. I hope you're liking the Lilith series.
You can see more of us so many different places. Check out the description. Thanks so much for being here.
Yes, thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye.